Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kendall Havenstein and I'm the Smart Marketing Operations Manager for Smart here Australia New Zealand. In Australia and New Zealand, I will be today's co-host. I will be here supporting the presenter in the background. I'm going to go through a few housekeeping slides and then I'm going to hand it over to today's presenter. So I'm just going to make sure that my screen is in fact being shared, which I don't think it is. So yep, now you should see it. So I'm just going to look over onto my other monitor here where my presentation is. Okay, so welcome to today's webinar. Welcome to anyone who also is listening to the recording. And I can see we have a few live attendees coming in. So to use your control panel, you can just click on the orange and white arrow in the top left corner and that will shrink it down to this size here that you can see on the right. And then if you want to pop it back out, just click on the white and orange arrow again. To ask questions, if you have any questions throughout, I will be here to answer any questions that come through. We will have a question and answer segment at the end where we'll be able to ask the presenter questions directly. If you have a question throughout that is related to the presentation, please by all means pop it in. If you don't get an answer straight away, it could be because I'm going to be saving it up to the end for the actual question and answer segment. Also at the end during the question and answer segment, instead of typing it in to the question panel, you can also come off mute and ask your question directly to the presenter that way, but we will save coming off mute till the end. You can earn a certificate for this webinar just by navigating to training.smarttech.com and then log into your account so it knows what name to put on the certificate. And if you just click on certification, the learn more box in the middle, blue box in the middle, that'll pop out to all the webinars. If you just navigate to this webinar and then at the end of that webinar recording, click on the mark complete button, which you can see down here on the left. If you do click on that, that'll automatically generate you a PDF certificate that you can save locally and do what you like with. Okay, so now I would like to welcome and introduce today's presenter. Well, welcome back to today's presenter. We have Molly Turner. Molly is based in Sydney. Molly is an education consultant with 15 years experience in education, varied roles including a level coordinator, a level year coordinator, and the level year coordinator 7 through to 12 within both primary and high school sectors. The main disciplines Molly taught included French and English, and she's also a SMART certified trainer. Now, just below Molly's profile picture there, you can see her contact details. You can send her an email or you can connect with her on her Instagram at mollysmartau. And also she will be doing a Hello Smart SLSO activity today. So if you would like to open up another tab, or if you have another device, your phone or an iPad is fine. If you want to grab another device, open up hellosmart.com and then the class ID is 307, and I believe Molly will prompt you to do that again, but sometimes it does move pretty quickly, so it's good to get prepared. Okay, I will now hand it over to Molly. Thanks, Molly.
Thanks so much, Kendall. I'm just going to pop my camera on and say g'day, and then I'll also share my screen too. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen, and we will sort of be in a second jumping into hellosmart.com, just like Kendall said. I think, just to sort of start off with, if we just sort of put today's session into a little bit of context for us all, the reason why we sort of feel like, this particular session, we have done one of these sorts of webinars before around our 22 EdTech capabilities. So you may have seen that, you may not have. If you're brand new to it, it's incredibly interesting to sort of see this assessment tool available, how it was first sort of created and how schools use it to inform their strategic planning. So it has been around for a while, but what's really interesting is it's just had a redevelopment. So off the back of last year, which was quite a crazy year in education, we have sort of redeveloped some of our sort of survey questions and our approach and the ways in which schools can access this assessment tool. So that's what I really wanted to kind of let everybody know today. And what we're also finding is a lot of different schools are starting to sort of turn to these types of assessment tools because we know the role of technology in our classrooms. And we always sort of have, right? It is the lens through which we experience our world, but sort of now more than ever. So we have had obviously a massive spate in the use of technology over the past 12 plus months. A lot of teachers that may not have sort of embraced technology were thrust sort of into it, but we're, you know, realizing more and more that the intricacies of sort of using technology in the classroom, and knowing that it's not just sort of on the fact that, yep, great, I've got a smart board in my classroom, or we use computers, you know, everything's going to be a lot more engaging for the students. In fact, there's a lot of different sort of factors at play, right? Now, you'd know that, so we can't just put technology in a classroom and then the next minute everything's going to be you know, fantastic and whiz bang and our student outcomes are going up. And what I'm going to do now is just kind of draw from your own ideas to sort of establish what you already know about EdTech. So what I've done here is I've made myself a little shout out. If you're new to our online platform, Smart Learning Speed Online, soon to be called Lumio, what I've done here is I've just gone and I've added what's called a shout it out. But I'd love for you to join into this digital space and give me some of your responses and answers. If you know you haven't done this, look, we've obviously got the chat box as well in GoToWebinar that I'm happy for you to put your ideas down there. So if this is the first time you are doing it, I'd get you guys to go to hellosmart.com, please. You can do it on your phone, or you can do it on a new tab if you're on your computer. And my teacher number is 3070. So once you pop in there, I'll just get you to join as a guest. So it's a really sort of fun way to engage, obviously, in a digital space here. So let's give everybody a second just to come in, and I can see obviously my students that are popping in. And then what will happen is you'll get a little chat box, yep, once as a teacher I sort of start it. So we'll see, look, we might just sort of get started. If you're having any difficulties, by all means, you can use the chat box in GoToWebinar. Much of a muchness, obviously I like using our technology. So what I'll do now is I'll start it for you guys. And the question that I'm really interested to know from you is, what are some of the key factors to successful technology adoption? So I'm sure in your school setting, and I'm not sure what your role is, maybe you're part of IT, maybe you're classroom teacher, maybe you're, you know, the principal or deputy principal. So I think, you know, depending on your role, we might have different sort of responses to this. But if we're talking about successful technology adoption as being, you know, ensuring that the technology is having an effect on student outcomes. We've just got someone saying PL here, so I'm guessing that's professional learning, which is a good one. Yep, concentrating on how to use the technology, that sort of sits in that sort of same realm. You know, this is always the most obvious response, I suppose. I'm just putting some of my ideas up here as well. Resources, not just a one-off when it's purchased. Yep, that's right. There's it's always a really interesting activity to do this before we sort of, you know, talk about our 22 EdTech capabilities, because what I'm going to sort of reveal to you guys is that yes, resources, staff mindset, even professional development, professional learning, these are all sort of key factors, but there are a number of other factors as well that I'm going to draw on today, which I think is going to sort of help anybody in their pursuit of, you know, adopting sort of technology and having that effect on student outcomes. Thank you so much for contributing to that. All right, let's launch into the presentation now. So we know the role of technology sort of in our classrooms and how important it is to have. And look, you know, over the however many years that we've been, technology has been a part of the teaching and learning. For some reason it's just stopped. Yeah, let me figure out what's going on with my PowerPoint presentation, which of course you test before anything. Oh, there we go. Oh, it wants me to click. I love this one. Look at all the different technology from sort of back from after the 1960s of what's been introduced into our classrooms, about $9.5 billion in EdTech spending. So, you know, increasingly more and more in our classrooms, technology, is a saturation of technology almost. We've got, you know, robotics and drones, and we've got interactive flat panels, and we've got Chromebooks and devices and everything. But what's really interesting is sort of during this time and this progression in technology and this spending in technology, if we look at something like that effect on student impact, and I want you to answer the question here. Like if I sort of told you, we've got this huge incline here of spending and technology in our classrooms, but if I sort of asked you, what do you think the impact has been on students and on student outcomes? Has that also sort of been increasing as well, if you like? And the answer is really no. So if we look at the data and all the research sort of behind it, there has been some fluctuations, right? So some fluctuations where there might be, that recognition of professional learning and development, or, we might have these sorts of, funding going into things like professional learning and development. And so we get these little spikes sort of happening, but on the outset, it really has very little student impact, right? Now, that's a really interesting kind of question. It's sort of like, well, why? Why is it? And what is actually happening that we can be implementing or adopting these technologies in our classrooms, which we know that, students are more sort of engaged with, but having very little student impact. So SMART was really interested in that question. So what is actually happening? Because at the end of the day, and we know that OECD has really come out and everybody knows this, that, more technology doesn't guarantee better outcomes. Okay. So, there's a lot behind what is actually going to guarantee that outcomes. And so SMART set off on this journey to actually find out what factors were actually involved in ensuring that technology goes into classrooms and it is having an effect on better outcomes, and in particular on student outcomes, right? In 2016, we commissioned a research paper into teaching technology and learning, and to try and understand the interconnection between classroom practices, but even school environments and the adoption of technology. So what happened in that as well is once we actually we did that research paper, we did come up with this sort of formula. We realized that, when schools are choosing their right technology, and this is, really draws to why it's so important at the moment to be having these sorts of tools, this 22 EdTech capability tool, assessment tool at your disposal, is because a lot of the time when, schools are making these tech choices, they're often like the mindset is actually sort of back the front. So we know that starting with the teaching practices first, then looking at software, then hardware, that is going to equate to better sort of successful outcomes, rather than the majority of the time, this is what's happening. And this is what happens in schools. They look at hardware, then they go to software, and then they go to teaching practices. And that's actually having a really huge effect, with that kind of direction or that kind of approach. And obviously that training then, is focusing more on the hardware, the how-tos, right? How to turn it on, how to make a PowerPoint, how to do this sort of stuff, rather than looking at the pedagogy, the teaching and learning that's happening in there, driving student-centered learning, having opportunity for collaborative work, creativity, direct instruction, assessment, all these sorts of things that we're doing in our classrooms, in our teaching practices, that should be at the centre of this decision making, and how then we can have that technology to sort of help inform that. So look, I'm not sure what the situation is with your school at the moment, but we're working with a lot of schools. We're working with jurisdictions too, in ensuring that they are sort of well equipped to be able to make these informed technology decisions. The other thing that we're really interested in, so the conditions for success. So we kind of understood a little bit about what's maybe happening through that research, but we wanted to as well really kind of narrow down onto, well, how can we know that some schools have great success, that there's this introduction of technology into their classrooms and programs and practices, and it having an effect on student impact? So what is it that they're doing that's so different to others? So what we ended up doing is a second report, whereby we looked at all of the leading educational entities across the globe that were doing their own sort of reporting in EdTech. So ISTE and OECD and CASEL, UNESCO were all obviously running their own sort of research. So we did a huge literature review of all of these as a starting point. We wanted to see what sorts of trends were in these particular reports, and what these big entities were saying about it. What we sort of found out from looking at all of these were, we identified 4 different areas. Okay, so when anybody sort of was talking about successful outcomes or successful implementation or adoption of technology and it equating to an increase in student outcomes, there were 22 EdTech capabilities that we identified that fit into these 4 different categories, right? So the 4 different categories, they're pretty, straightforward, I think. There's no major surprises there. Looking at things like, how well a school is, has a strategic technology sort of plan and implementation strategy in place. The integration of technology in teaching and learning. So that's how the technology is obviously working alongside the practices in the classroom. Professional development, obviously major area there. And then of course the technology and infrastructure management as well. So out of those 4 key areas, we then found 22 EdTech capabilities, and you can see the different capabilities there that fit into these 4 categories. And I think on the outset, when I first sort of read this report, when I first started at Smart, there was a lot that I kind of knew. I had worked in schools for 15 years. I had been in a position of decision making within the school, and so some of it wasn't that surprising, but some of it really was. So those key call outs for me would be things like student participation in technology planning, parent and wider community engagement. These key factors being part of the process when making tech decisions, but then also in the adoption phase of the technology as well. What we're finding is that those schools that had a greater student participation in the technology planning had more favourable outcomes, increases in student outcomes. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? The students are part of the process. They're the ones using the technology. They've got the buy-in, so they are engaged with it. And that was so obvious during last year. I know that in Australia we were quite lucky, or particularly in New South Wales, where we had sort of one stint of remote learning, whereas the rest of the world was kind of still very much sort of in that for the, a good 12 months solid. And it was also sort of, highlighted in that time that those schools that did involve the students in, well, we have to go online. Well, what is it that, would be your sort of favourite or preferred platforms to do this? Those schools that actually involved the students and the parents and wider community had greater success. So that was sort of really interesting. The other real key call out that I'd put there as well would be it is student social and emotional learning support. for social and emotional learning. Now, I'm all for social and emotional learning. I was so surprised that that had a direct correlation between the use of technology. And interestingly, since sort of, my experiences with working with schools in doing this particular assessment, I have come to learn what that actually looks like. What is it exactly that's in place around that support for social emotional learning, and how does it correlate to this use of technology and adopting technology and it having sort of more favourable outcomes? So I will share that with you in the part 2 webinar next week, where we focus on one of our schools, Holroyd High School, who uses this particular assessment tool to inform their strategic planning, right? Anyway, so that's a really interesting sort of point there. So the other thing as well is what we then did with this is we identified obviously those areas, but we needed to as well know out of those stages of capability development, there are some obviously that correlated to higher learning outcomes, right? So some are more important than others. So some are going to have a greater effect. Obviously, professional learning is definitely going to have a greater effect than something like maybe parent engagement. Still necessary and still applicable, but yeah, the weighting for it is obviously different. So yeah, we did survey 536 education leaders in 11 countries to sort of find out, the nitty gritty of these capabilities and which ones sort of carried more weight than others. Okay, so I'll come back to that in a second. Just so you know as well, we did end up commissioning an Australian white paper. So we did a survey just Australian educators as well, to kind of put it within the Australian context rather than the global context. Results were very similar, but I will share that report with you as well. And interestingly enough as well, we're looking at the types of technology that also drives outcomes. This here we're working with some of the jurisdictions around Australia in terms of, yes, there's spending to be had. There's a lot of funding out there at the moment. And people are making these sort of tech decisions. And this is a really good sort of way to look at, well, what is it that's going to have that sort of greatest effect on outcomes? And things like the assessment software, student collaboration software having such a great effect in there as well. So this sorts of information is obviously really handy when making these tech decisions. So what we do then, in order to sort of find out how a school can collect this data and what they can then do with it, is we basically came up with a survey that then was able to identify from schools where they're tracking with their EdTech capabilities. So out of all those 22 capabilities, where are their strengths? Yeah. So we need to sort of look at, well, what you're doing fantastically and perhaps areas for development, because what we're finding is, some schools might be sort of really strong in their professional development and professional learning, and that continues to be an area of focus. They're missing out on these opportunities to develop things like student involvement in decision making. So it's a really nice way for them to get this rich set of data. And with that data, we know that it's all so important these days, isn't it? It's all in the data, to be able to look at the data and then make those informed decisions. So interestingly as well, we had the schools that have sort of taken these, most of them were actually quite surprised by the results. It is anonymous, so the teachers can take it honestly. Well, that's really important, I think, for them to know that it has to be a really genuine understanding of sort of what's happening within the school context. So it's anonymous, they take it, questions, I think it takes about 20 minutes, but disseminates between the entire school. And then they get this really rich set of data. And what they're able to sort of identify there is, data that then these sites of schools that we work with, they use that to inform their strategic planning. So we had one school up in Queensland called Sheldon College, and which they always had this sort of 3-year strategic plan. They then ended up paring that right back, and they have a yearly strategic plan now based on this data, and every year they take the same assessment and they see the movement. They see where that they've improved, and perhaps maybe that they have brought something up to a strength and no longer maybe a focus, and then they're kind of focusing on some of the other capabilities there to get there. But yeah, so that was, I always thought that's really interesting when we sit with schools and principals and the executives and go through the data, that most of the time that they're quite sort of shocked with things that they thought they were doing really well, and that hasn't been the case. So what's, at the end of it, what's really great, so I told you before about, some have are weighted differently. So what we do here is we give this kind of overview and this quadrant about things that you should be maintaining and things that you should be reinforcing. And anything on the above, sort of this quadrant up the top right here in reinforce, would be those key areas, because they do have greater weight. So if you just schools pick a couple of them to focus on, right? So collaborative PD for this one here may be sort of where that they're looking at. Teacher mindset and development. This school found that was sort of a really important one here. The other thing that we do with this, so you see the learning space and design, just reminds me of another school we've worked with, so CASEL North, where they took this particular survey to get a really thorough understanding of their environment before they were just about to embark on a new build. And I don't know if anyone's New South Wales Department schools on online today, but check it out. It's so impressive, the new build. Basically what they did though is, one of them obviously for them was this learning space and design. They were all sort of teaching out of, I think there was about 3 classrooms and about 16 portables. So that was really sort of big focus for them in redesigning. So the other really cool thing that SMART does, because of its network, is that what we work with schools to then tee you up with industry leaders. So in CASEL's case, we had learning space design as being one of them identified as an area of focus, and what we ended up doing was linking the principal and the architects and builders up with Professor Stephen Heppel. And if you don't know Professor Stephen Heppel, he really charges the way in what we call optimal learning environments, right? He does this amazing work around, what's the most optimal learning environment. And they then design their learning spaces around that. So they have these, phenomenal collaborative spaces. They've got, technology in there. They've got plants, for the CO2. They've got light coming in. It's really quite inspiring. So that's something that we do as well. So we then, try and sort of link schools up with people that might be able to then support you in those areas of focus. So yeah, our first sort of strategy with this and what we've been doing is working with what we call our Smart Exemplary Schools. So that was sort of straight off the bat in terms of how we can show how they're leading the implementation of EdTech capabilities and developing models of practice. So I've mentioned CASEL North and Sheldon and also Holroyd, and that we'll kind of drill down a little bit more into those guys next week about how actually what have they done? What have been the practical applications to this particular assessment tool that they've been doing? So the other thing as well that we've been doing with this particular report and assessment tool is that we do meet with key jurisdictional leads and to make sure as well that there's support there for schools to align the EdTech capabilities with their priorities as well. So we worked with ACARA, Visible Learning, Future Focused Learning New South Wales, and School Learning Frameworks in South Australia. We did this at one of our conferences, so Inspire Greatness, which will be happening this year in September. If you haven't seen the save the date, September 10th. And we will have a component of this will be around our 22 EdTech capabilities, and particularly for the region where the where the conference will be held in Dubbo. They are in the throes of making massive EdTech decisions at the moment. So we have just sort of been up there and doing a bit of presentations with some of the key principals up there, and working with the New South Wales Department Schools to ensure that those decisions that they're making are going to be grounded in data, in analytics, and not just kind of guesswork, right? The other thing, so this, going to this, our third sort of strategy really ties into the Inspire Greatness Conference. It's really, I can sit here this afternoon and tell you all about it and tell you how amazing it is, but when you hear from these principals and leaders about taking the assessment and what they have then been able to do with the data, it is really, really inspiring. So it's a sort of great way for you guys. So it will be part of our conference as well, where we will have that opportunity for our key schools to be chatting through what they've been doing and the actions that they've been taking from doing it. So yeah, the other one there as well, and this is a little snapshot of Holroyd there with Nada and Matt Fields, the deputy principal. We have sort of worked with them. I'll go into it a bit more detail next week, but around their training, so their training programs and how they have developed those and the outcomes and successes they've had since doing that. Just on the other little picture there, that's a little shot of Kelkel. So that sort of new design, sort of inspiring space there that they worked with Professor Stephen Heppel on. All right, so let's get into the nitty gritty of it. Just before I sort of get there, any questions popping up? I don't think so. Cool.
No, not now.
Thanks, Kendall. So look, this is the EdTech assessment tool. I'm going to just show you it sort of live. Let me just get out of this here. Don't know why it's not closing for me. Oh, great. Don't crash. There we go. All right, can you still see my screen there, Kendall?
Yes. Yep.
Great. Okay, cool.
All good.
All right, so look, I'm going to pop this link here into the chat for you. It will be sort of something you can have a look at. So this is just our run through of the new assessment tool and the areas of focus that the questionnaires go to. So I'm trying to do two things at once. Chat, I can do this, I'm a teacher. Type it in here. My computer's running really slowly. Hopefully that link there works for you. It is on our website too, so don't worry about it. So basically, this is a really good document for yourselves to digest, but also if you think, my school is going to really benefit from looking at this assessment tool and getting a really clear understanding as to sort of those areas that we're excelling at in the 22 EdTech capabilities and those that perhaps need a little bit more focus, particularly before we embark on integrating more technology into our classrooms. This is really good to digest. It's great to then maybe give to the decision makers, the powers that be, about whether or not it's something they'd be interested in. If you do find that it is something that they are keen to explore a little bit further, please contact us, okay? So you can take the assessment sort of individually. We encourage here in Australia a bit of a different approach to the rest of the world in that we think that that's a better data set if you're getting the entire school to do it, and that we can sort of step in and give you that consultative, have that consultation with you around, those areas. We read the report with you. We then kind of can try and link you up with any industry leaders that we think would help your school. So just so you know, the four areas that we're looking at are around leadership, professional development, pedagogy-driven technology, infrastructure, and we've just added the blended learning to the mix now as well, okay? So that's obviously really important. Whilst we might not you know, we hope that it's not going to be a reality for any time after the vaccinations. It is, and we have to have those plans in place. So to know how, we call it, remotely ready you are, is really sort of beneficial to then inform the planning around what is you know, most schools didn't have a contingency, did they? They didn't really have that kind of plan when this hit us last March. So have a look through there. It gives you a bit of an idea, again, those some of the stats we've sort of been through, but that's a great document for you guys to do there. And then basically on our website, if you even just go to smarttech.com, this little box will pop up and you just hit take the assessment. So if it's something that you want to do as an individual, just to get a bit of a feel for it, you can even get your own EdTech. Like if you look here about pedagogy driven technology, maybe I'm just interested to know, you know, am I doing the right thing in my classroom around using technology to drive pedagogy? So if you're just interested as an individual, you could just take you get an individual report. Like I said, we feel in Australia it's much more beneficial as an entire cohort, entire school to take it. But you can do that yourselves. You get a little bit of a glimpse into the types of questions and things that we're asking to generate that. So I'll pop that one in there as well, just into the chat. Yeah, so look, that's something for you guys to have a look at in your own time. But like I said, you know, do encourage you to get in touch with us, and you'll get our contact details if you don't have them already, to say, look, yeah, I think this is going to be really worthy, and I would really love to have an extended conversation with one of your education specialists, or even our advisor, Sue Beveridge. Okay, so the only other things as well that I'll show you that we've got here is that once you take the report, and this is like the individual one, okay, what we're able to do is sort of track. It gives you this really nice sort of comparative analysis between, now you might have sort of taken it and then someone else, this is sort of all participants who have done it in Australia, so you can kind of benchmarking yourself against sort of someone else. You can see that I've just gone through and done, you know, willy-nilly, but you can have a look, and there runs down all of your 22 EdTech capabilities and gives you really nice insight into what you're doing, sort of excelling at. Parent and wider community engagement, I'm going really well in, and then other sorts of areas that I might need to focus on, like support for social and emotional learning. So you get that really nice snapshot. And then basically we give you as well that quadrant, okay, and these are just numbered here because we've then, it was a bit tricky to sort of get that in there, but you can sort of cross check on those that sort of you need to take action, and those that you can need to maintain, right? So you get that little rundown there, and then we do give you, and I don't know why this is so tiny, we give you some advice, okay, on the outset about perhaps strategic planning, or those top areas, so those top sort of 4 that we've identified are going to have the greatest impact. So if you're going to do anything in the immediate future, we're looking at things, for me it would be strategic planning, leadership, vision. Now I've taken the entire test, so I've done all of the five pillars, sorry, and then some action as well, and you can as well get in touch with anyone else from SMART. What we'll do as well in the follow-up, and just so you know, as I put it in context, we'll also send you the remotely ready report. So this was done in September 2020, obviously in response to just knowing about what's happening out there in schools and how's been the response, how schools responded. It is sort of mainly focused with schools in North America and the UK, obviously that they, you know, really endured it a lot more than we did here. But again, it's a really sort of interesting look into this other sort of type of focus that we need to be really aware of within our in our schools, that and how that impacts and the effects on student learning, right? So a very interesting report there that we'll share with you. And of course, like I mentioned before as well, there's also the EdTech capabilities and learning outcomes, which is the Australian results, okay? So I did sort of mention that we've got that white paper. So again, have a look in here. It's actually quite interesting as well in terms of just the Australian context, okay? So they'll be coming with our follow-up email. Hopefully you guys have got the little, you've got the link there if you're sort of interested in taking the assessment as an individual, or maybe you want to even just share that out as well with any colleagues. So I know that once you take it, you can, it has a little button for you to then share with a colleague, and you can kind of share that out with one another. Okay, so that sort of brings me to the end of it all. Hopefully sort of you found, I know we're going to be a little bit early today, but that's good. We can give you some of your time back. I'm sure you're really busy, probably starting on your reports. So look, are there any questions there in the chat box?
Yes, one has come through here. Actually, there's two that are here. So we've got, does it cost anything?
No, it doesn't, which is quite phenomenal thinking about the work that actually goes into it from, our perspective, like how we're involved in it all. But yeah, it's completely free. And look, I think some people get a little bit, they're a little bit conscious of the fact that it is, a manufacturer of a product. The results certainly aren't, oh my God, you took this test and now you need to buy 50 smart boards. It's really not about that. And that's kind of something why I do endorse this. I also, as an educator, as a teacher that's, been teaching for 15 plus years, it's one of the reasons why I work for Smart, is because it does this in particular demonstrate that real commitment to education, but also to ensure that, whether it's our technology or any technology that's going into a classroom, it's having an effect. Yeah, it's not just sort of, causing barriers because it's not working properly, or causing issues and being a headache. Because I remember as a teacher sort of having to grapple through that. So no, it doesn't cost a thing, which is great.
Yeah, so it truly informs, the tool to inform teachers. And there is one more question. Can a school take it more than once? It's a good question.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the interesting thing. I think I mentioned before that schools do it every year. So what will happen is, and I wish I could kind of show you the data. It's obviously a bit private from the school, but to show you, visually what's happening from one year to the next in terms of, have they made progression? Has the investment on professional learning or social and emotional programs within the school had an effect? Do the teachers sort of believe that, it's been money well spent, or it's been a successful thing? So, the assessment tool does so much, for a school. And I think that's why schools, once they sort of take it, they really appreciate it. It's giving them insight into whether or not what they have implemented, what their strategic plan has been, is tracking and definitely making a difference. So yeah, definitely you can take it as many times as you like.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well that's the end of the questions. So I will take back the screen share now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mols. That was a lot to take in, actually, even I know the EdTech tool back to front. Now what is showing on my screen? Okay, so where were we? So we had our question time, and now I'll just do a quick wrap up and I'll let everyone go for the afternoon. So we actually might finish on time tonight, which is great because we have run over time for the first 3 webinars we ran yes, over time by about half an hour. So if you want to get some free resources, you can go on to our Smart Exchange. You probably also hear me call it SMEX as well. So if you can jump on there, you can, the website for that is at the bottom right hand corner of the slide. You can see now. It's content.smarttech.com, and you can search by grade and also by subject. So there's loads of content in there, ready-made lessons all ready to go. So if you haven't checked out our Smart 360 platform yet, definitely encourage you to jump on and have a look. I know I say this every week, but it's definitely worth an explore around, just to also experience a virtual platform like no other. It really is a rich experience, this platform that we have adopted, and it is packed full of professional learning content. You can go into the research room to get PDFs. You can download locally onto your computer. You can get research articles. All our white papers are on there. There's also Australian focused content as well. You can also jump into the auditorium or the breakout tracks. And I'm just reading from the top menu here that you can see. So you've got the auditorium and the breakout tracks across the purple bar there at the top. So you can jump in there and watch content. There's short videos, webinars, loads of content in there. And you've also got your swag bag, which you can collect things along the way. It's a virtual swag bag, which is pretty cool. And it also has the exhibit hall, which you can also access from the top menu, exhibit halls, and you can jump in on there, and that gives you an aerial view. So this is a focus view on one of the booths, but when you first jump into the exhibit hall, it gives you an aerial view, and it's actually a really nice view of the beast that is Smart. It gives you a view of all the different offerings that we have in Smart. So right now we've got the at-home educational and games and videos booth that you can see, and then each booth has its own little menu that runs across the bottom, and you can click through each menu to discover each topic content that offering offers. And you've also got our Smart booth in there as well, so you can jump on in there and say hello. And you've also got the ANZ New Zealand Ed webinar series, which houses all the recordings. You can get to that multiple ways through YouTube and also through our main smarttech.com website, the training.com website, but it is also linked in the Smart 360 Australia booth. And there's also another really nice view of all the webinar series that you're attending now, all the past recordings. And as Molly mentioned, we also have the Inspire Greatness Conference. Save the date. It is September 10th. We will be hosting a face-to-face event, so we definitely encourage you to get down. We are going to make it extra awesome this year because we did miss out last year, and we were all pretty upset that we missed out last year because the whole team and I look forward to putting this on every year. It's our annual flagship conference, and our venue and the venue location and our keynote will be announced very soon. That'll be announced through email, and then it'll be put on our social media, our ANZ local page, and also we have got a Facebook event page for the Inspire Greatness Conference 2021 this year as well. So all updates will be on there. So if you feel like you're not getting the emails for it, you can just jump on and follow the Facebook event, or just jump on and follow the ANZ local page, Facebook page, and you'll get all the event updates. And I'll also update you in the webinars as well for the venue and keynotes, and also when the agenda comes as well. They'll also be updating everybody here. So we will be also allowing people to have access to that virtually after the live portion is completed on September 10th. So you also have access to all the content virtually as well. Okay, so for those who might have popped in a bit late at the beginning, you can earn a attending certificate for this webinar if you just log on to training.smarttech.com, navigate to the certification learn more box. This will pop out to all the webinar recordings, and if you just navigate to this webinar and find the mark complete button that pops up at the end, and then if you just click on that, as long as you're signed into your training.smarttech.com account, you will be able to download a certificate locally. It'll automatically download your certificate locally. And I do also send out the webinar recording with the certificate link at the end now, within a week after the live. So next Tuesday, you should receive an email. If you've attended the past 4 webinars this term, you would have noticed you'll get an email now on the Tuesday, the following Tuesday or Wednesday after the live webinar. So it takes me a couple of days to get that all set up. So that also now goes to your the email that you use to sign up for the webinars, or you can just navigate train.smarttech.com when you get a chance to do that as well. So we are 5 webinars down. That just went so quickly. So we had building your resources, building your resource bank at the start of the term. Then we had literacy and languages analysis using Smart Notebook. And then we had engaging students in project-based learning. And then last week we had Nada, who presented, Nada, who's an educator from Whole Road High. She presented special needs students, SLSO and zones of regulations. And then of course this week we had part 1 of the part 2, which will be, Molly will be back next week to present that, the 22 EdTech Capabilities Reboot. So there's way more information to go on that. So please tune in next week and join us next Wednesday at 3:45 p.m. I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon, and to those listening to the recordings, a lovely evening or afternoon or morning. Okay, great. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.